Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thanks for being here today. I'm Noel Hacegaba, and I serve as the Managing Director of Commercial Operations and Chief Commercial Officer for the Port of Long Beach. And today, I have the pleasure of serving as your Master of Ceremonies. On behalf of the entire Port team, it's also my pleasure to welcome you to the 2018 Pulse of the Ports event, brought to you by your Port of Long Beach. You know, it's hard to believe that it's been 14 years, that this is our 14th annual look at how things are shaping up for the upcoming peak season. And each year, this event gets bigger and better. And this year is certainly no exception. Incidentally, how many of you have been to all 14 Pulse of the Port events? Just by show of hands. Anyone here? That's fantastic. I hereby induct you into the Pulse of Ports Hall of Fame. Give yourselves a hand of applause. Now, a lot has changed over the past 14 years. Back in 2004, the Dow Jones Industrial Average around this time of the year was at 10,000 points. In 2004, a tweet was reserved for birds because Twitter was not around. In 2004, there were 25 shipping lines that carried the global containerized cargo. And the biggest ship around at that time was 3,500 TEU. This is why these events are important, because the industry evolves, and it's so important to keep an eye on the trends and make sure that we're all prepared as an industry. At this time, to begin the program formally, I invite you to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Please take your seats. Again this year, the Port is webcasting this event live at www.polb.com/Pulse Ports. So greetings to our national and international cyber audience. And of course, as in past years, you'll find the video archived on our website later today for future reference. We have an exceptional lineup of speakers this year, and I know that we're all eagerly anticipating to hear what they have to say, and I'll be introducing them individually as they come up, but let's give them all a big round of applause for being part of today's lineup. And I know that you will have many questions for them, but I will ask that you hold them until the end during the formal Q&A portion of the program, moderated by Bill Mongalusa of the Journal of Commerce. Bill, thank you very much for being here, moderating this. Now, those of you participating online can email your questions to pulse@polb.com or tweet your questions to #POLBPulse during the event. Now, please join me in welcoming some special guests who are joining us today. And I'm going to name each of our guests, and I ask that you please join me in a round of applause when I've concluded the list. We begin with South Coast Air Quality Management District Board Member Dwight Robinson, Long Beach Community College District Board members Sunny Zia and Vivian Malaulu. We also have former Board of Harbor Commissioner members from the Port of Long Beach, Nick Ceramic and Doug Drummond, along with staff from the offices of Senator Ricardo Lara, Mayor Robert Garcia, Councilmember Lena Gonzales, Councilwoman Susie Price, and Councilmember Dee Andrews. Also with us this morning is U.S. Coast Guard Captain Charlene Downey. From the California Transportation Commission, Commissioner Fran Inman, who wants me to remind you that every day is a freight day. Also with us today are local officials of ILWU and the Pacific Maritime Association. Thank you all for being here. As you know, the Long Beach Board of Harbor Commissioners is the governing body for the Port of Long Beach, and we appreciate their ongoing support for this important forum. Our current board president is recently retired from a long and successful career at Long Beach City College, where she served more recently as Executive Vice President of college advancement and economic development. At LBCC, she specialized in linking education and training and industry needs in order to develop a well-trained workforce and provide business and industry opportunities to grow and to create jobs. The port was a frequent beneficiary of her good work and now has the good fortune to have her leadership full-time. Representing the board, please join me in welcoming Harbor Commission President Anne Bynum.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. It's great to really see such a full house, I have to tell you. And welcome to those of you around the globe who are watching our webcast. We're thrilled to have you as well. And I want to give a quick shout out to our students from Cabrillo High School who are part of our Academy for Global Logistics. Can we give them a hand, please, and have them stand? These are our future port leaders. On behalf of my fellow commissioners, the entire port team, and all of the organizations that support this event, thank you for joining us for the 14th annual Pulse of the Port's Peak Season Forecast. It is also my great pleasure to introduce my fellow members of the Long Beach Board of Harbor Commissioners who bring much expertise to our governing board. First of all, I'd like to introduce Commissioner Bonnie. Can you please stand, please? Commissioner Bonnie Lowenthal, former State Assembly member and 1st District Council member. Bonnie's over there. And Commissioner Frank Colonna, right in front of us here, a respected business leader, owner of a realty and property management company, and former 3rd District Council member. Unfortunately, Secretary Guzman and Vice President Igascu could not join us today, but we appreciate their dedication as well. Together, we set the overall policy and strategic direction for the ports, Harbor Department, and the Port of Long Beach itself. We all know that global trade and transportation is big business. So thank you for being here today to participate in this collaborative look into the future. It's a unique opportunity to hear from top experts from throughout the supply chain. I had the pleasure of meeting many of our speakers last night and chatting with them, and they're a very informed, provocative, interesting group, so I know you're going to enjoy the program, and I want to thank them for being here today, too. It's a privilege for the port to host this event. Forecasting is not an exact science, but piecing together information from various segments of the industry help us look at the big picture and plan more accurately for the months ahead. 2017, we're thrilled, was a record-breaking cargo year for the Port of Long Beach, and this year is off to a roaring start as well with more record-breaking months. But as always, we know this industry will continue to face and have to adapt to new challenges. Whatever the challenge, here at the Port of Long Beach, we are laser-focused on continuing to provide efficient, individualized, and rapid service to our customers. To do that, we have to work very closely with our supply chain partners, all of you, to ensure that we are all working together to provide optimal service. That's what the Pulse of the Ports is all about, especially as we approach the peak shipping season. We believe we're in a good place for continued growth, but we know that there's going to be game changers coming our way. The purpose of this gathering today is to identify, anticipate, and look at these challenges and ask the right kinds of questions to help us all prepare. Helping us to do that at the Port of Long Beach is our next speaker, Mario Cordero. Mario understands our industry, he understands that it's changing, and he has the skill sets to help us chart a new course to adapt. Many of you know Mario as a former commissioner at the Federal Maritime Commission, and he also served for 4 years as chair, developing policy and strategy for ports nationwide. We're thrilled to have him as our executive director, so please join me in welcoming Mario Cordero.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you. Welcome and good morning. As many of you those of you who know me know I'm an avid baseball fan. Thursday is opening day, But because so many of you are from out of town and may have been raised in other places of the country, you have your own favorite team. I'm not going to talk about my favorite team this morning. But I am going to refer you to an op-ed in today's Los Angeles Times. And the op-ed is entitled, "America Needs Baseball More Than Ever." It's a good read. Now, why would Mario Cordero say this at this point? Because if you read the article, there's an analogy to this industry. You know, for those who do not like baseball, they always talk about it. Baseball is boring. There's no action. It's not like basketball and football. But baseball is about delayed gratification. And I thought about this industry. You know, at this port, we're doing a lot of exciting things. Noel was referencing taking us back to 2004. And if you remember, in 2004, there was a real severe crisis here of congestion. I was a rookie commissioner at the time. And it had nothing to do with a labor discussion or a contract. It had everything to do with this port, this complex growing in double figures at the time, and volume. And many people said thereafter that the West Coast would at some point dwindle with regard to their market share. That has not happened. To the contrary, this port, and I could say our good friends across the bridge, had the greatest year ever in their history. For the Port of Long Beach, 7.5 million containers moved through this port. So it's a great story. So my message to you is that it is about delayed gratification. It takes time to implement some of the vision that the people at the Port of Long Beach have, much of it that you've seen already and you'll continue to see. And that, I'm going to, at this point, thank the two bureaus who have had much to do with putting this forum together, our communication staff and our business development staff. I want you to give a big applause to these people, the hard work that they do. Now let's go back to 2004, because one person in particular I want to acknowledge is a gentleman who you all know, kind of my go-to guy when I have a question about, hey, Don, what do we do in this situation? And that person is Don Snyder. Where's Don? Stand up, Don. In the year of 2004, we did have a crisis here. It was a good crisis. There was a lot of volume, but a lot of congestion. And Don had this thinking out of the box idea of, you know, we should have a forum once a year where we invite our customers and get everybody together and talk about the industry and what we need to do, and have the experts here to tell us, you know, what's going to come upon us. So, Post of the Port, forever will be thankful to Don Snyder for this great idea, because now what it's evolved to is coming here on an early Monday morning at the tune of, was it 500 people, I believe, I think at last count. So again, thank you so much. I mentioned about our volume, our great year of 7.5 million containers, the best in our 107-year history. I also want to note, when you talk about vision and implementation, our $4 billion capital improvement project, no other port in the nation has invested that kind of money in infrastructure. And you're seeing it now in terms of this coming into fruition. And we're not finished. We're going to continue. The Commission, again, has given us a directive and mandate to continue to invest in infrastructure. Recently, the City Council approved or denied the appeal that is to the Pier B rail facility project. We're going to invest in the rail because we want to move containers faster. So we're on the way to have the $1 billion investment in rail. With regard to the comment about moving containers faster, look what this complex has done in the time that we've had great volumes here. From what I read, the average dwell time here for 2017, which is important to many of you in this room, was reduced by 23% in 2017. In the months of January and February, both of those months, the Port of Long Beach had in excess of 600,000 containers moved for each one of those months, the best ever in our history. And as a matter of fact, for January and February 2018, the dwell time continues to decrease. So thank you to the marine terminal operators and all the stakeholders who have made this possible, because in the next decade, we are going to amplify our rail capability. Our commission has given us a goal of 50% movement of rail at some point. It's a goal. It's not going to happen tomorrow, and it may not happen in the next 10 years. But like I said previously, if we have goals like zero emission in the next couple of decades, we could certainly have goals with regard to other endeavors, such as putting containers, moving them faster, and accelerating our on-dock rail capability. So with that, I do acknowledge our challenges: industry consolidation, the ships are getting bigger, new tariffs on steel and aluminum. But on the other hand, let's keep a positive mindset on this. Just yesterday, it was announced that the United States and South Korea have reached an agreement in principle with regard to amending that Free Trade Act. So all is good. We may talk about the issues of trade and international trade on the political level, but at the end of the day, I still think we will have a balanced approach that's going to be good for the industry and good for America. And you're seeing this already in terms of how we're looking at some of these trade acts at this point. The future of Pier Pass. You know, I've been a big commentator about that. It's getting better. I appreciate our friends at the MTO, Marine Terminal Operators, and the Pier Pass who are trying to configure how do we make this program better? How do we reduce these turn times? How do we increase these gate hours? And essentially, how do we move containers faster through this great port? So with that, we do have commitments not only to continue with our sustainable development, to be environmental friendly. And as a matter of fact, talking about that, the Pier B rail project was appealed. And thankfully, the council just recently, because of the work of our great staff, voted 9-0 to deny the appeal. But interesting to note that those who appealed did not come from the neighborhoods, did not come from the environmental community. Why? Because they now have, or they believe, we have a great resume about sustainable growth. And we are proving what many said back then, particularly you remember President Jim Hanklin, who used to talk about grow green, that we're going to do it. And that's in fact what we've done. So as I conclude my comments again, thank you so much for being here this morning. And again, let's look forward to see what the experts need to say. But whatever is said and whatever the issues are, I predict that 10 years from now, in 2028, we're going to have someone at this podium talking about the great things that we did here on the West Coast, more particularly the Port of Long Beach, and how the volumes have increased, because this is and will continue to be the gateway of choice. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mario. And I would add that just a couple of years ago, Mario himself was one of our speakers here at Pulse of the Ports. I'd like to take a moment now to say thank you to all the exhibitors who joined us today. Thank you for your support and for spreading the word about this event to your membership. And remember, attending Pulse of the Ports not only gives you a free breakfast, but it qualifies for credits with the National Customs Broker and Forwarders Association of America Educational Institute, and the event qualifies for 2 certified customs specialist and 2 certified export specialist credits. So you might want to take note of that. Our primary goal today, as you've heard, is to help you better prepare for the peak season. So we begin by taking a look at the big picture, the global economy. And I don't know anyone in our industry who can set the stage for our journey through the supply chain better than our first speaker, Mario Moreno. Mario is Senior Quantitative Economist at Drewry Maritime Research, conducting trade and transportation data analysis, econometric modeling, and forecasting. Before that, he was a Senior Economist for IHS Maritime and Trade. He has been leading the way as an economist for many years, producing reliable and widely praised forecasts based on his deep understanding of international trade and transportation markets. He provides need-to-know intelligence to all sides of the shipping world, and that's what we've gathered to hear today. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the podium Mario Moreno.
Thank you, Noel, for the kind introduction. Good morning to everyone. Thank you to my friends here at the Port of Long Beach for the kind invitation to come back and speak at this event again. Thank you very much, especially after this winter storm we had at the East Coast in the last few days. So thank you for getting me out here. Today, I'm going to talk about the Asia to U.S. container trade outlook. I want to start my presentation by highlighting what happened in 2017, first to the Asia to U.S. trade, and then going to provide an outlook. And then I want to talk a little bit about the possibility of a U.S.-China trade war, then move on to the westbound route, the U.S. to Asia container trade, provide an outlook, and then I will conclude by summarizing my key points of my presentation. First, the Asia to U.S. container trade. What happened in 2017? U.S. imports from Asia grew 3.5% versus the forecast of 6.9% that I presented here a year ago. So although U.S. imports from Asia grew as expected, the performance was disappointing. What were the factors driving growth in this trade route? First, the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy improved as expected. It grew by 2.3%. Up from 1.8% in 2016. However, 2.3% is a very moderate growth for the U.S. economy. There was one sector of the U.S. economy that disappointed. That's the existing home sales sector. It went up by only 1.7%. This is an economic indicator that I follow very closely because it exerts a very strong influence over containerized imports of furniture and home goods. If you take a look at U.S. existing home sales and containerized imports of furniture, you'll see that they exhibit a very strong positive correlation. When existing home sales go up, then containerized imports of furniture tend to go up as well. It didn't do very well last year. Several factors: rising mortgage rates, home prices are rising, which makes it more difficult for the home buyer, for the new home buyer to afford, and limited supply. Also, auto sales were also disappointed last year, which in my view had an adverse impact over the demand for containerized imports of auto parts. U.S. import prices, excluding fuel, went up by 0.9%. The forecast was for a dip of 0.1%. This is linked to the weakness of the U.S. dollar. And as the U.S. dollar gets weaker, then it gets more difficult to import more goods at the same level as was acquired a year ago. So what is the outlook for 2018 for this trade route? What we're looking is a growth of under 7%, 6.8% for 2018. This growth forecast is mainly based on purely economic fundamentals. We're looking that the U.S. economy will improve farther in 2018. According to some forecasts by Oxford Economics, U.S. GDP should grow by around 2.8%. This is better than the 2.3% growth that we saw last year. The drivers of economic growth will be, again, consumer spending and also the business sector. So mainly because of purely economic fundamentals, we're looking at a growth forecast for this trade route of close to 7%. This may look a little high. On the surface, it looks very high, a little high, but take a look at the growth rates for the last 3 years. For 2015 to 2017, the growth rate in this route was only between 3% and 3.5%. There is a major risk, of course, and that has to deal with the possibility of a U.S.-China trade war scenario. In my view, China could lose more if, in the case of an all-out trade war between the U.S. and China, China could lose more than the U.S. in terms of both dollar amount and in terms of TEU volume. According to 17 data provided by the Global Trade Atlas, U.S. imports of goods from China total approximately $505 billion. That was last year. U.S. exports of goods to China during the same year total approximately $130 billion. So there is a significant imbalance, as you can see in the numbers. That's the chart on the right. And in other words, the US is buying almost 4 times more than China buys from us. There's a similar situation in the case of TEU trade between these two countries. According to data from peers in 2016, the ratio between US containerized imports from China and US containerized exports to China was at 3.4. This means that for every 3.4 inbound containers for China, there was only 1 outbound container to China. And again, there's an imbalance in the TEU trade as well. What's interesting here is that that ratio was actually higher 10 years ago. That ratio was higher at 4.5 back in 2006. But it has declined over the years without the threats of any imposition of tariffs. Now, what will be the effect, what will be the cost of a US-China trade war scenario over total US containerized exports and total Chinese containerized exports? It seems like the cost will be equal for both. In 2015, about 24% of Chinese TEU exports were shipped to the US. During the same year, similarly, 24% of US containerized exports were shipped to China. So in the scenario of a US-China trade war, it seems that the effect, the cost for US containerized exports and Chinese containerized exports could be the same. It would be roughly equal. Now, is this US-China trade war scenario, is this something inevitable? In my opinion, there is a good possibility of a US-China trade war scenario in this year over the next few months. But I don't see it as an all-out trade war scenario in which both countries, they use these tit-for-tat retaliation efforts. I think that if there is a trade war scenario here, it will be limited to certain products, certain industries. We don't know for sure what are the products that the US government wants to impose tariffs on. They have announced that they want to impose tariffs on about $60 billion worth of Chinese imports. That equals to between 11 and 12% of total US imports from China. But we don't know what those products are. And if we take that route, for sure China will retaliate and will impose tariffs of their own on US exports. Just for a moment, think about that if the Trump administration decides to impose tariffs on Chinese furniture, Chinese apparel, and Chinese footwear. Together, these 3 commodities account for nearly 20% of all US containerized imports from China. Just these 3 commodities. They could be more. We don't know for sure. But if these 3 commodities get hit, then there will be certainly a negative impact over containerized volumes coming from Asia. The bottom line is this, is that still a trade war between the US and China still looks unlikely, mainly because both nations have a lot to lose. Consumer prices will certainly go up here in the US. The Chinese government will certainly retaliate by imposing tariffs of their own on US exports. They have come up with a pre-list mentioning US pork, US fruits. They're also studying the possibility of imposing tariffs on soybeans, possibly. But still, especially China, they have a lot to lose. And I think that we won't see an escalation of these threats to a point that there will be an all-out trade war between these 2 countries. In this scenario, of course, West Coast ports will hurt most because West Coast ports' exposure to Chinese imports is quite significant. Between 2012 and 2016, West Coast ports handled approximately 68% of all US containerized imports from China. But this exposure to Chinese imports has actually declined over the years. Back in 2002, 2006, that exposure was to as high as 77%. It seems that West Coast ports have been able to diversify their markets, and now they're getting more inbound shipments from other parts of the Asia-Pacific region. and other parts around the world. In the Asia Pacific, more cargo from Vietnam, more cargo from Indonesia, Singapore, etc. But definitely, if we are going to see a U.S.-China trade war scenario here, West Coast ports will hurt most, for sure. On the export side of the trade, U.S. exports to Asia fell by just 0.8%. The forecast I presented here was modest growth of 1.3%. The global economy expanded a little under forecast. The US dollar exchange rate fell by 0.3% on average. But what really subtracted from growth in this trade route was China's trying to become more environmentally friendly. They're reducing their demand for recyclables, scrap paperboard, scrap plastics, and scrap metals. That certainly hurt this route because that's what takes a lot of space in the containers on that route to Asia. And of course, the West Coast ports hurt somewhat during 2017 in this route. But for 2018, what we're seeing is a rebound. U.S. exports to Asia should grow by nearly 5% after falling 0.8% a year ago. The main assumption here is that the global economy is improving once again in 2018, growing by 3.2%, up from 3% growth in 2017. Favorable exchange rates. The US dollar is expected to continue declining in value, which should support further growth for US containerized exports to the Asia Pacific region. Major assumption here, no trade wars with China, for sure. That's the major assumption in this forecast. To summarize the key points is that the US economy is forecast to improve further in 2018, mainly driven by consumer spending, the business sector. The Asia to US to EU trade is forecast to expand close to 7% in 2018 on improving US economic conditions, bearing the risk of any major trade war with China. Again, an all-out US-China trade war scenario is still unlikely. I still doubt that both governments will let these threats escalate to a point that there will be an all-out trade war between these two countries. There's so much to lose for both of these nations. The last point I want to make is that the US-Asia trade is forecast to rebound this year by nearly 5% on the back of improved global economic conditions and favorable exchange rates, meaning that the foreign exchange value of the US dollar is expected to continue declining this year, which should support growth for US containerized exports to the Asia Pacific region. With that, I want to conclude my presentation and thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Mario, thank you so much. Excellent, excellent summary. Asia to U.S. forecast for imports plus 6.8%. On the export side, plus 4.9%. We'll take that any day, right? And I guess we'll have to check our Twitter account to see how this trade war escalates over time. Our look at the supply chain shifts next to exports. And our speaker is Steve Gonzales. Steve is Vice President of Sales at Plastic Express, a privately owned trucking, warehousing, packaging, transload, and logistics company based in the city of Industry. With a quarter-century of sales experience, Steve has been with Plastic Express since April of 2017. In California and Texas, the company works closely with large plastic resin producers to package their products for worldwide export. Plastic Express has more than 350 employees across 16 states. Before joining Plastic Express, Steve owned a sales consulting and training company for 12 years that facilitated training for more than 50,000 sales professionals from 22 countries. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Steve Gonzales to the podium.
Thank you, Noel, and thank you to the Port of Long Beach for this opportunity to speak with each of you here today. I'll have to start off by letting you know that I was very much off on the numbers of people that I'd be presenting to today. When I accepted this invitation, I initially thought that I was going to be in a small conference room at the Port of Long Beach at their offices, and it would be just a roundtable conversation with a few people. Boy, was I off on my numbers. And a global webcast as well? I didn't even think about that. So let me reintroduce myself. My name is Steve Gonzales, and I'm the VP of Sales for Plastic Express. I've been asked to speak to two topics. One is to give you an overview, a brief overview of Plastic Express and what is it that we do for our customers on a day-to-day basis. And the second topic is to talk to you about a plastic bubble that's about to burst here in the United States. And when it does, it'll have a positive impact on every one of you here in this room here today. So let me start with Plastic Express. We've been around since 1970. We are a warehouse and transportation company. 90% of what we do on a day-to-day basis is we transport, store, and package plastic pellets for our customers. And those customers can be producers, distributors, or end users, or traders. And what they'll do is they'll come to us and ask us to do one of the three things that I mentioned, either transport that resin, store it, or package it for them, okay? Now, we have a footprint throughout the United States. We're located in 16 different states with 14 warehouses strategically located in very important ports within the United States. Now, we offer a suite of solutions for our customers from a domestic standpoint and also to export as well. Now, let's get on to the plastic bubble that's about to burst here. And when I talk about this, I want you to realize that this has been something in the making, and I'm sure all of you have had some level of knowledge about this. So let me give you an idea of how it started. It all started with the Shale Gas Revolution. It's fueling access to inexpensive fuel stock or feedstock, giving North American plastic resin producers an opportunity to really take advantage of a global competitive advantage that they have in front of them today. And believe me when I say this, I'm going to share some numbers with you. They are taking full advantage of this. Now, the first wave of plastic resin that we're going to see is coming from polyethylene. And I put a sample out there on each one of your tables, or I actually had Audrey and Wendy help me with that. But put the sample out here so you can get an idea of what these plastic pellets look like and all the fuss is about these little plastic pellets. I sure hope that none of you thought that was salt and that you used that for your eggs this morning. If you did, I think you'll be okay. I think you'll be okay, all right? But let me give you an idea of the numbers of what we're talking about here. So there's been $187 billion allocated towards the construction of 19 plus new plastic resin plants across the United States. The concentration of that's going to be coming out of the Gulf Coast. What it means as far as volume is 32 billion pounds, right, of volume coming on to the market, which is 50% greater than current production today. So let me put these in numbers that you're familiar with. So if you take a look at, by the end of 2019, you're going to be looking at 16 billion pounds coming online, which translates to 725 million TEUs. Plenty of business for all. And if you take a look at by 2022, 18.7 billion pounds, which translates into 848 million TEUs, right? Staggering numbers. Now, where's all this resin going to go? Initially, the thoughts were that it would be consumed primarily by the United States, but that's just unrealistic, and numbers have changed and to realize that that's just not possible. So, to be able to take a look at where do we want to export here, you have to take a look at emerging global markets. And where's the middle class in that global market? So 160 million people each year over the next 5 years will join the global middle class. Now, 80% of that growth is going to be in Asia. So where's this resin going to go? Well, probably to not many surprise, primarily it will go to Asia and across the world, but the bulk of it will go to Asia. Now, let's take a step back and talk about why current ways in which we export resin today will be challenged through this volume. Currently, you take a look at the production of plastic resin today is out of the US Gulf Coast. It gets from the refineries, it's railed over to a packager. A packager then takes that and puts it into either super sacks or Gaylord boxes or 25 kg bags and puts it on pellets, drays it back to the Port of Houston, and then from the Port of Houston out to the rest of the world. Now, that's what it looks like today, but let me give you an idea of why that's going to be challenged moving forward with all this volume. So it'll be challenged in different ways, but the first one to talk about is plant production. Now, unfortunately, Houston went through a really tough period over the last year with Hurricane Harvey and the ice storm, and production was delayed, which has caused a bottleneck so that you're going to see within the next 3 to 6 months multiple plants coming online at the same time, which is going to cause a congestion. You look at it from a rail and rail car standpoint, there will be congestion there as well, which is not uncommon in Houston. It happens just about every year, a couple times a year, but it will be challenged in that perspective as well. These packaging lines that you see, roughly about $5 million investment into one of these packaging lines, high-speed packaging lines. And right now within Houston, there's about 5 to 8 of them out there right now. The volume is so much that these lines won't even be able to keep up with the volume that's coming. Drayage, well, I heard a number not too long ago that they were looking at about 11,000 additional trucks on the highways of Houston. If you've not been to Houston recently, it rivals our freeways, our traffic. So that's going to be a congestion there. Container availability would also be challenged. So when you take a look at this, you start to ask yourself, well, where does it go? It's going to be forced out of Houston, so where does it go? So it really goes back to taking a look at container availability and vessel capacity. As you well know, you're well positioned here at the ports of Long Beach, and the Southern California ports are well positioned, right? And so when we take a look at this, and the volume is going to have to go somewhere, so going west makes the most logical sense. Not only from the opportunity of taking a look at this and saying that from the port of Houston, what's going to be the fastest way out of Houston? Well, everyone agrees that it's Dallas, rail over to the port of Long Beach or LA, and then going out from Asia from there. It's the fastest way to get to Asia, right? It is also, in some cases, the most cost-effective way when you take a look at this. But as the volume gets pushed out, it's going to be a very attractive option for many, okay? So I want you to think about this. The future is bright, no doubt, for all of us. Now, this has been a year of delay in getting this resin out to the market. And I did have a conversation with my bookie last night, my bookie Jimmy. And Jimmy says that of all intents and purposes, we're going to be seeing, the over-under is May 1, that we'll see our first wave of plastic resin coming online from these refineries in Houston. So keep that in mind, May 1, all right? He's never wrong. Well, maybe sometimes he is. But by all means, feel free to take one of these with you as a souvenir if you'd like. They're on your tables there. And I want to leave you with this one last message or thought.
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
Exactly how do you mean?
There's a great future in plastics. Think about it. Will you think about it?
Yes, I will.
Enough said. That's a deal.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Well done. Well done. I wish I would have seen that clip about 20 years ago. I know you all wish the same thing. May 1. Everyone put that on your calendar, right? May 1. And I can tell you that for the Port of Long Beach, plastic resin is our #1 key export commodity. And now it's time to switch our focus to imports with Daniel Gardner. Dan joined Lakeshore Learning Materials in August 2017 as Vice President for Supply Chain. The company is dedicated to creating innovative education materials that spark young imaginations, instill a sense of wonder, and foster a lifelong love of learning for infants and children up to 6th grade. Dan is a 20-year-plus veteran of the freight forwarding, customs brokerage, and 3PL industry, and his previous U.S. and Latin American roles include President of LATAM for Excel Global Logistics and Senior Vice President of the U.S. Western Region for DHL Global Forwarding. Dan is also fully bilingual in Espanol and the author of 4 books on global trade. Please join me in welcoming Dan Gardner.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Noel. As our host said, my name is Dan Gardner, and on behalf of Lakeshore Learning Materials, we'd like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to what we have to say. I'm going to be providing the BCO perspective, that beneficial cargo owner, just a fancy term for an importer, and I'm really going to talk about 3 things, not unlike what Steve spoke of. Who we are as a company, what we do as a supply chain, how we depend so dramatically on the port ecosystem, and then just provide some perspective on how we see imports in general, not just the LA Long Beach port complex, but the perspective of a BCO from a global viewpoint. To tell you a little about Lakeshore Learning Materials, interesting story of entrepreneurship and perseverance. You can learn more about it on our website at lakeshorelearning.com. But the company was founded in 1954 by Ethelyn Kaplan. As Noel said, we are indeed in the learning materials business, hence the name. And really in the picture that you see up on the PowerPoint, everything that is in that picture, with the exception of the children and the teacher, obviously, are the products that we offer. So from rugs on the floor to modular furniture to 5,200 games, toys, puzzles, manipulatives, arts, crafts, all oriented towards a learning experience. But the origins of Lakeshore are worth mentioning here. Ms. Kaplan was a single mom in Nebraska in 1953, 1954, with the dream of opening a toy store in California. Put her 3 kids in the car, drove to California, ended up in San Leandro, which for all intents and purposes is the Oakland area, opened up that store, and quickly realized that teachers were coming in looking for educationally oriented products. She started her own catalog by hand, and the business grew from there. Her 2 sons took over the business in the 1970s, moved down here to Carson, as you see in our slide as well, and the business continues to be a family-owned operation run by 2 sons of the original 2 sons, so a 3rd-generation business. We are 2,400 people around the country. I've worked a few places in my career, and I can say it's one of the most diverse, open, accepting environments that you would ever want to be involved in. I was in a new product meeting yesterday, and I was feeling pretty diverse myself because I was the oldest person in the room by far. But Ms. Kaplan instilled a culture of a meritocracy. If you have talent, you're going to be put in the game. And that's reflected in the diversity of our business. Having said that about Lakeshore and transitioning into this supply chain conversation, we are an omni-channel organization. And that's yet another fancy buzzword that came into play about 6, 7, 8 years ago. It's just another way of saying the different ways in which we distribute our product. And it's demand that drives supply, and that supply comes through the LA Long Beach port complex. We have 60 stores around the country, still have the traditional catalog sale. Online sales is a vibrant, important part of our business. We have institutional sales, 50 salespeople out around the country selling to YMCAs, daycare centers, and school districts, et cetera, and we do quite a bit of exporting. Let's move into our supply chain profile and start to tie in how our lifeblood is literally the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. We work with a combination of domestic and international vendors to the extent that our Asia inbound program requires us to have a buying office in Hong Kong, a dozen people interacting with vendors, suppliers, things of this nature. Probably of most importance for our discussion today, we are about 5,000 TEU a year, 20-foot equivalency units, so we're not a huge importer. We're certainly not Walmart or Lowe's or Home Depot, but we are a stalwart of the import community in the United States, and that translates into a lot of additional jobs above and beyond the 2,400 that we employ directly, working with the ports, with the carriers, with the marine terminal operators, the drayage people, customs brokers, customs entities. It's very much an ecosystem that we value greatly and depend upon almost exclusively. We do about 1,500 customs entries a year. Things changed at Lakeshore last year and could have a dramatic impact on our relationship with the ports. Because if you noticed in my previous slide, I said 5,000 TEU all through LA Long Beach, and then parenthetically it said currently. Well, forever, all of our US distribution took place here in Southern California, right over in Carson. We own some substantial real estate over there as an organization. But as the demographics of the United States continued to trend, and I love California, but I was raised in Massachusetts, so I have to give a little shout out to the East Coast. Really, a high percentage of our business on the East Coast, we decided to open up a distribution center in Midway, Kentucky. So whereas we were married, gladly married to the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles for 30, 40 years, I would describe our relationship now as still married, but it's a little bit more of an open relationship. Probably the wrong metaphor to use given the state of affairs in our country, but little late for that. In any event, because we have two DCs now, we have the choice to go through Prince Rupert, use the Canadian Rail down through Chicago into Kentucky, through the Panama Canal, up through Savannah, Charleston, Norfolk, et cetera. That is not our intention. We see huge value in continuing to work with the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, and we are committed to that relationship. How do we support our operation in Kentucky? And actually, the pictures you see, the upper left is one of our facilities here in Carson. That's a brand new 500,000 square foot facility in Midway, Kentucky, company-owned, company-financed, very important part of our operation. We do transload. We split containers here and put them on the rail or on the road via truck out to Kentucky. We also operate a foreign trade zone here, do some pretty innovative things there. So, a blank canvas, and this is where people are probably saying to yourselves, well, yeah, you're saying all kinds of nice things, but here comes the but. And here comes the complaints about pair pass and gates and this, that, and the other thing. Nothing could be further from the truth. We're pragmatists, we're realists, and more than anything, we put a lot of value on the work that the port and its supporting ecosystem does. I've been in logistics my whole life, been to every major port around the world. This is just amazing what we have here. So, whereas our relationship is, I would say, with the ecosystem, the port included, oftentimes symbiotic, rarely antagonistic, but always optimistic and collaborative. We value the work that everybody does. Our business and the 2,400 people that work for Lakeshore, we wouldn't have anything to do if it wasn't for this ecosystem. So what we're talking about is in that very much optimistic spirit. Recognizing, and this is the most important message that I'll deliver you today, every player, the drayage people, the terminal operators, the customs brokers, customs entities, forwarders, ports, everybody has a role to play. But what I will say to you is that you all, and I'm talking to the service providers now, to the BCOs, of which we are a customer of you, that you make money by moving freight. You create value for your customers by facilitating trade. That's a different philosophy that should be the underpinning of your entire value proposition, regardless of what you do in the trade. If you don't buy into that thought, I'm sure your businesses will continue to do well, but to echo my mom, who was an Irish Catholic mother on Boston's North Shore, I will say to you that you're in the right church, you're sitting in the wrong pew. Which is to say, you really have to philosophically believe that you are facilitating trade on behalf of your customers, because it's really that important. So whereas we all have an individual role to play, what do we have in common across all of us in this vast, amazing ecosystem? The business that we're all in is inventory management at the end of the day. And when you handle 7.58 million containers a year, I imagine that it's easy to lose sight of the fact that there's somebody's property. Those containers are full, at least the ones coming in. Unfortunately, the ones going out often aren't. That's a offhanded poke at our trade deficit, obviously not my best line of the morning, but we'll continue on anyway. But we're in the inventory management business. People own this property, and there's a couple of things that any BCO operating in any port pays a lot of attention to. So let's talk about that. 3 enemies of dynamic inventory management. Because if you think of inventory management, you might conjure up ideas of goods sitting in a warehouse. That often happens, but most companies, certainly most BCOs, are in the business of goods moving at all time. That's what we mean by dynamic inventory management. First enemy, bloated cumulative lead times. Just a fancy term for how long does it take from the time we place an order on a vendor somewhere until we get it where we need it to sell. The longer the lead time, the less predictable the supply chain becomes. The ports play a huge role in that. Bigger ships take longer to offload, extended gates, appointments, they all play a role in what we're talking about here. Second to the last point, variability. Meaning the difference between what we plan on happening in our supply chain and what actually takes place. So if we say cumulative lead time is going to be 90 days from the time we place an order till we get the goods, and we allot a certain amount of time for operations in the port, and it doesn't come out the way we planned, that's variability. Variability is anathema to supply chain. Variability in cost as well. We have to budget for what we buy, what the transportation costs are, etc. Things can get expensive, understandably, here in Southern California, but we need the cost to be what it was predicted to be. Lack of visibility, almost finished. And I know I'm about 20 seconds over, so if you will indulge me, I'll thank you in advance. Supply chain visibility is the key to success, certainly from the perspective of the physical movement of goods. Through technology that we use of our own and through our third-party partners, we have visibility into our supply chain from the time we place a purchase order through production, export at origin. Why do we need this? Because we need to plan. How are we going to allocate our inventory to those omni-channel distribution channels that we use? It's all connected. That's why it's an ecosystem. The port, any port, plays a huge role in these 3 items. And in closing, I'll offer you a paradox, the visibility paradox. As I said, we have visibility at origin, on the water. We know when a ship is 5 days out. We can clear through customs with 5 days advance notice. But the paradox is you'd think that as goods came closer to the port, you'd have more visibility. It's the other way around. And it's the case in any port in this country. So there are a lot of initiatives to create greater visibility in the port. But we have a little bit of a black hole that we compensate for with some elbow grease, working with our third-party logistics partners and such. But not knowing if a container has been offloaded, can't make an appointment until the container or containers become available, have to get an appointment, might take 3 days to get an appointment, you better have an empty to bring back to the right place. These aren't complaints, these are observations about the state of affairs in a global supply chain and the vital, vital role that all ports, and especially for us, LA has played for LA Long Beach has played for 40 years and will continue to play moving forward. So I'll leave you with that visibility paradox. I'll thank you for your kind attention and wish you the best for the balance of 2018. Stay safe. Thank you very much.
Dan, thank you so much for that very thoughtful, constructive, and optimistic perspective from a BCO, and we promise we didn't give him extra bacon just to say that. I think all of you who have been around our ports for the last few years know that everything Dan said is what we're working towards in aligning the different segments under supply chain optimization, other efficiencies. So thank you for that, Dan. Now, shipping lines are the next stop on our journey through the supply chain, and our speaker is Lawrence Burns, Senior Vice President of Trade and Sales for Hyundai America Shipping since January 2017. Larry brings 30 years of extensive industry experience in various ocean carrier management capacities. He began his career at Hanjin Shipping as a sales representative in San Francisco, then returned to Hanjin Shipping as general manager of the Northeast region before moving up to senior VP. Now, all of us involved in international ocean trade are impacted by the bigger and bigger ships being introduced into the Trans-Pacific trade lane and the effects that these alliances are having on cargo handling. Now, I know that Hyundai Merchant Marine specifically has very aggressive plans to grow their business, and maybe Lawrence can tell us a little bit more about what's coming up. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Larry.
Thank you very much, Noel. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you for the Port of Long Beach. Thanks for everybody coming out today. I was really surprised to get the invitation because Mario Cordero knows that I'm a San Francisco Giants fan. So here I am in Southern California, but the invitation came with a caveat, and I have to leave town today before opening day tomorrow because apparently I'm only able to support the Port of Long Beach and not my team. I want to talk to you today a bit about where the condition of our industry, ocean transportation, container industry, and the consolidation that it has gone through, it continues to go through. Have you been watching the BAM show? Essentially, we're talking about bankruptcy, acquisitions, and mergers. This has been continuing since about 2014 at a very rapid rate, and since 2016, you've obviously seen some major changes in the way that we are merging together and consolidating the industry to the point of where now we have 7 supercarriers and 3 alliances that are limiting the options that you have on the ocean transportation, especially from Asia and to Asia. But there's also another element that is out there before us that I believe is going to continue this consolidation movement. The race has been always to make sure that we're the most economical carrier that can be out there, so that race to grow that size and be able to develop those, or deliver those low-cost economics to you has always been the objective. As we come into 2020, I'm not sure that there's going to be so much more merger, acquisition, or bankruptcy activity. I think that there's still a couple of more players, including Hyundai Merchant Marine, that are expected to join the 7 containers as major carriers, super carriers in the industry, and reach that threshold of 1 million TEU to make them that way. What Hyundai Merchant Marine has had the opportunity to do is essentially give some support through the South Korean government. That is now our largest shareholder. And on the drafting table currently, we have plans to actually reach 1 million TEU by 2020. So as Noel alluded to, there is an expectation that 7 major containers will at least be 8. And we're a part of making sure that we grow to that point in 2020. But I also wanted to mention a game changer that's about to take place in 2020, and that is the low sulfur fuel requirement of the IMO. So at this point, we've gone through a lot of mergers and acquisitions, we've gone through bankruptcy, and that has consolidated the industry, and so has consortiums made a part in doing that as well. But in 2020, there could be a consolidation of fleets. It's always been expected, or what we've lived through in the past 10 years or so, is plenty of ample space available in the industry. But as we need to retrofit our ships or transfer them to LNGs, build new ones to replace existing ships that may have not been completely through their life cycle, we may find that the amount of available TEU may be shrinking a bit. So I just want you to keep that in mind as we move out towards 2020. I'd also say that one thing that we always need to keep in mind as we look at the ocean carrier grouping is that you can always estimate, you can never estimate the underdog in this industry. I've seen over my career carriers that had never really were on the radar all of a sudden become the major players in the industry. So whatever we're seeing today, I have a prediction that we may not be seeing in the next 5 years is the same lineup of the largest carriers. Just something to keep in mind. I want to kind of bring it down to the point of where we're actually focused on 2018 right now. regardless of where you fit in the supply chain, the Port of Long Beach and Los Angeles is the largest gateway in the country. It's going to move the most cargo out there to and from our Asia partners. Planning each peak season can be a test of a logistician's success. We've seen the forecasts that Mario put up here. I've seen different numbers, 8 to 9% supply growth. I expect that supply growth is going to locate itself more on the East Coast than it will the West Coast in this coming year, and that's mainly through the expansion of the Panama Canal and the ability of the ports on the East Coast to be able to take that supply. So as we cascade those ships into that service, we expect that a good share of that supply is going to be going to the East Coast. At the same time, the demand is going to be growing about 4 to 5%. That demand growth is going to actually be spread evenly across the coast, in my opinion. But what else that you might expect, and again, I want to get back to this point, which is the important point to all of you in this room, is the peak season. This demand growth is never spread throughout the year at the same time. So we're going to come into a peak season with a 5% growth and a supply that may or may not hold up that supply growth at the destination that you're looking for. So all origins and destinations are not created equally. I'm getting there. Okay, there we go. At 5% growth in Long Beach and Los Angeles, the terminals are going to be under pressure for that congestion. And because carriers have scaled that capacity to be economical, you're going to see that the space is not really going to be that much of an issue. The ocean carriers also have an obligation to deliver that cargo all the way to its destination. And so we become responsible for the discharge of the cargo, the gate out, the gate in, the loading of the cargo. And since those terminals cannot grow, we're going to have to work in cooperation to try to bring that cargo through those gates in a much more timely way. Ocean carriers are often pressured to relieve those costs by bundling them back into the ocean product. And this is where it becomes difficult for the ocean carriers in 2018. Carriers are going to have to push back on this a bit because essentially we've been able to deliver the ocean piece at a low-cost element, but as we all know, the land costs are increasing, and that is going to increase the pressure on us being able to bundle that back into the package. We're going to need to pass those costs on to the importers and the exporters. Our business seems to never escape the possibility of disruption as well. And I don't mean to scare anybody with these friendly faces, but there is uncertainty with East Coast labor relations. Now, it was reported just this last weekend that the contract negotiation is going on very well. But let's just pretend that the contract was actually agreed to today. It still would need to pass through the ILA wage scale delegates and be ratified by the Atlantic and the Gulf ports. Now, the expectation for that to happen is sometime this summer. So what I would also ask you, what is your contingency plan? What is your timing of the trigger of your contingency plan? If you get to the point of where that agreement is done this summer, maybe in July, August, not really sure what your timing is, but if you don't take a part of a contingency plan and work with your carrier to make sure that you have the ability to deliver your cargo from both coasts and all coasts, what would happen if there was not an agreement? We kind of experienced that a few years ago on the other coast. It's a possibility it could happen this year as well. So that's something to also take into consideration. A railroad portion. You know, it's been very difficult, and I know we're all in the room to cooperate and try to build a better process through the ports. But one of the things that has been difficult for carriers as a bundled product to bring your cargo into the interior of the country is really how long it takes us to clear those containers out of the terminal. And I've heard earlier today many presentations that are saying how much we're working together to try to build that rail infrastructure and improve that timing. But we're talking about 2018. And we're talking about the kind of volume that could be coming in through this port. And I just want to put a picture up here to help describe what we experienced in 2017 as an ocean carrier, Hyundai Merchant Marine, coming through the ports. You can see in the peak season that it took anywhere from 7 to 21 days to completely clear our intermodal cargo off the terminal. So we have a real need here to try to develop a method that is going to be much faster to be able to bring that cargo out into the interior of the country. Those service improvements are going to be costly. Again, we can't be bundling that cost back into the ocean contract. Eventually something needs to break, and we need to work in cooperation together to make sure that happens. Again, with your demand growth, developing possibilities of labor disruption, all that cargo coming in through the West Coast, this is going to be an important factor. Trucking, we all know the escalating trucking costs, and this is going to be something that we also have to take into consideration. We can't, some of our contracts are building in those trucking piece into the contracts. We're not going to be able to bundle that back into the ocean product. We're going to need to ask our shipping public to take a part in that. The ports and the terminals are the epicenter of the collective responsibility to transport cargo. The port and its terminals' willingness to build the relationships directly with the importers and the exporters are really important collaborative effort to make sure that we are working together towards solutions to bringing our cargo and the great demand that we have to each take part in the success of this economy and build a better transportation network. And I really appreciate the port's work and the commission's work to have that happen. Thank you very much.
Larry, thank you again so much for accepting our invitation and offering your perspective from a shipping line carrier. And certainly the Port of Long Beach was happy to welcome HMM back to our port last year. Now, one of the things that you've heard from Larry and before him Dan is the importance of the different segments in the supply chain to work collaboratively in the ecosystem. And a lot of that has to do with aligning the different needs, the forecast, the equipment needs, the labor needs, et cetera. And where all that alignment takes place, it all centers in the marine terminal. And Anthony Otto is our next speaker, and as a marine terminal operator, he's going to continue our trip through the supply chain. Anthony serves as president of Long Beach Container Terminal, where he is responsible for guiding the company through its industry-leading Middle Harbor redevelopment project. Anthony's career began in 1984, and prior to joining LBCT in the year 2000, he served in various management capacities throughout the maritime industry. He was named LBCT's vice president in 2003 and president in 2009. He is frequently consulted by elected officials and regulatory agencies for insight on balancing marine terminal operations with environmental stewardship. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Anthony Otto to the podium.
Morning, everybody. Hey, I just wanted to start this presentation with a video just to get the crowd pumped up. So if I could show that 3-minute video clip, let's start with that.
Optimal design, fully automated. The Long Beach Container Terminal, delivering the world-class productivity today's major retailers expect. At full capacity, This terminal will be the 4th largest port in the United States, all by itself, capable of handling more than 3 million TEUs each year.
The Long Beach Container Terminal is incredibly great for the Long Beach economy, but also great for the national economy. It's the greenest terminal. It's incredibly efficient. The technology is state-of-the-art. And of course, it's already created thousands of jobs and will continue to do so as well.
From vessel to yard to truck and rail, our turn times are not only quicker, but also safer.
We have the best container port in the world here now. We can handle the largest of the largest in the cleanest, sustainable way to make sure that we maintain our dominance in the industry.
On the water side, our berths are fully equipped with shore power, where our 2,700-ton ship-to-shore cranes, the largest in the United States, are capable of lifting 2 containers at once, delivering them to the first zero-emission, all-electric transport system. Like a highly choreographed dance, these all-electric, driverless AGVs quickly and smoothly transport containers to the 70 all-electric, rail-mounted stacking cranes.
What it says to the world about LBCT is you could grow, your business could grow, and you could grow green. That's just a great statement of the corporate citizenship that LBCT has.
In the Operations Center, our highly trained team continually ensures LBCT is quickly and strategically moving containers, reducing moves in the yard, and significantly increasing speed delivery to the trucks. And with Phase 1 of the nation's largest on-dock rail system already in operation, LBCT is the most efficient and the greenest terminal in the world. LBCT, ready to handle your cargo.
There you go, good stuff. Hey, that's my shameless marketing clip, so I'm sorry I couldn't help myself. I had to show it, so to get us warmed up. Today, the theme is kind of a new era of efficient operations, building a new model for Southern California, something that's more efficient than what we've done for the last 30 or 40 years. But first, I want to start with why the need for change. Southern California, unfortunately, has gotten a black eye in the press, in the JOC almost every year due to chronic congestion, long truck turn times, rail car shortages, chassis shortages, labor shortages, you name it, we seem to have it here. And we needed to do something to get rid of that perception or that reality and to fix the situation here in Southern California. We needed to meet the trucking industry's need for a faster, more efficient, and reliable gate and yard process. Bigger ships are coming. When I started in this industry, a 3,000 TEU ship was about as, was a big ship, and it's gone from 6 to 8, 13, 18, and now 22,000 TEU vessels. And those vessels and the move count that they produce is something that we're going to have to deal with in a system that is better able to manage those peaks. Environmental leadership was needed in order to design a terminal as close to zero emission as possible. And a more efficient terminal model for Southern California was needed, even maybe more importantly, to disprove this perception that the Southern California ports was unwilling or unable to evolve with technology like the rest of the world around us has been able to evolve with technology. So, the Middle Harbor Redevelopment Project was born, a joint effort of the Port of Long Beach, OOCL, and LBCT to build a new model. One that uses the best design, the best technologies to improve the level of service to the supply chain and hopefully restore confidence in Southern California as the preferred gateway of choice into the United States. An important thing, if you consider 1 out of every 9 jobs in the region is one way or another associated with the freight that pours in and out of this port complex every year. Let me show you an overview. Actually, it rolls out in 3 phases. We went live with the new facility in April of 2016, about 1 million TEU worth of capacity, got it up, stable and running well. Phase 2, we went live on in October of 2017, brought us to about 2 million TEU. And phase 3 is currently underway, under construction, with a projected completion of second quarter 2021 by the time it's completed, which will bring us to our final 3.3 million TEU worth of capacity. Some terminal, kind of a high view of it. It is a 40-year lease with the Port of Long Beach. It's the second longest lease duration in this country. It's a 304-acre footprint, certainly not the largest terminal in Southern California, but by the way we've designed it, it has an annual throughput capacity, again, of 3.3 million TEU. Give you an idea of the scale of that, that is larger than the entire Port of Oakland. That is almost the equivalent size of the combined ports of Seattle and Tacoma in the one facility. It'll have 3 large berths, be able to handle 3 of the largest container ships in existence simultaneously. We have the deepest draft alongside of any container terminal in this nation at 60 feet. We will have the largest on-dock rail facility in the country. It sounds like I'm obsessed with large and all that. I'm not. But you're going to hear a lot of that. Largest on-dock rail facility in the country with 52,000 lineal track feet within our fence line. 2 gate complexes, a total of 28 in-gate lanes, 17 out-gate lanes, tremendous amount of gate capacity to make sure that the trucks are delivered in and out of our facility very quickly. And for your reefer shippers, 2,250 grounded reefer plugs to be able to service all your refrigerated cargo needs. And of course, the most advanced container handling technologies in our industry. So the equipment fleet, we have purchased thus far 14 ship-to-shore cranes. These are the largest in the nation. They are, from its height, their reach, they are able to handle not only the 22,000 TEU ships, the largest in the world today, but even those that are contemplated for the future in the 25,000, 26,000 TEU range. Kind of built this place to handle whatever might come in the next 30 years. These are also tandem lift, the first in the country, tandem lift dual hoist cranes. What does that mean? That means while everyone else is loading or discharging 1 container at a time, we are loading and discharging 2 40-foot containers or sometimes 4 20-foot containers per cycle to and from the ship. Give you an understanding of the upward potential of these cranes. 70 automated stacking cranes in the yard running entirely off of software. A fleet of 92 automated guided vehicles, completely autonomous transport, all electric, 0 emission. 5 very large on-dock rail cranes spanning 8 tracks, as big as a football field. I'll show you a picture in a second, and a long list of additional terminal equipment and technologies. So let's look at the equipment real quick, just to skip through it. Key cranes, biggest in the world. Not the world, I'm sorry, the country. I'm getting carried away. Multi-lift capability. Here's a good example of a quad 20-foot lift coming from the discharge of the vessel, which is something we do on a regular basis. Automated stacking cranes, 1/6 high to give us the density and for the speed of delivery to the trucks that we service. Intermodal yard cranes as large as a football field, spanning 8 working tracks, very efficient, very fast. Fleet of automated guided vehicles that do the shuttling throughout the yard. We have also built the largest battery exchange and charging station in the world, in which the battery that needs to be exchanged on an AGV, it's an autonomous robotic process. It pulls into the building, take the spent battery out, get a new battery, put it back in, and it goes off to work 5 minutes later. Pretty neat process. So going from the old environment to the new, it's more of a control room environment. This is a good overview of a place where we can centrally look at every piece of equipment on the facility, 100 cranes, every vehicle, every reefer, all from a single vantage point, being able to see in real time what the status is of each piece of equipment, deal with some of the problems as they arise, sometimes remotely, sometimes also central dispatch from a mechanic on the ground to address the problem as it comes up. We also have remote crane operations for the exception handling for the final delivery and placement to the trucking industry. This gentleman who used to drive an RTG out in the yard is now sitting at a remote table with the aid of a joystick and CCTV, air conditioning, light music. And so it's just trying to point out a significantly different environment than what we had in the past and what we have today. Truck turn times. I always like to brag about this. So our truck turn times, and this is not our data, this is data from the Harbor Trucking Association, which seems to be the standard measure for performance in our industry nowadays, showing the red line, which is the average of my competitions at about 81 minutes in February, to the blue line, which is LBCT, which is roughly half of that. So we have definitely the fastest turn times. For you truckers in the room, I'm sure you can appreciate that. And it's a big selling point for the new facility and its design and the technologies that we've deployed. We built not just the cleanest container terminal in this country, we have in fact built the cleanest container terminal on this planet. I can say that confidently because I've studied it. This chart doesn't just show or compare us to other terminals in the world or in this country. It actually compares us to the other terminals that are in Southern California, which have already been cleaned up by 90% through the combined efforts of the Port of Long Beach and LA's Clean Air Action Plan. Above that, our facility is 84% cleaner than the others that are in Southern California today. And we're proud of that. So, milestones reached. Again, not to repeat myself, fastest turn times in the Port of Long Beach and LA. That's a good thing. Reduced particulate pollutants by more than 84% versus other Southern California terminals. We have a trained and highly skilled workforce in our partners, the ILWU, and we have steadily improving productivity and velocity as we basically go forward and tune the machine. And to close, what's next? Well, optimization. We've got the terminal up, running well, stable. Now it's a question of really optimization through data analysis. And there's one thing our terminal produces is a tremendous amount of data, and our ability to be able to make sense of that information, to use it to tweak and tune the software as we go, in order to shave seconds off of each cycle will eventually allow us to reach our productivity goals over time. And of course, we will continue to evolve with technology in order to remain 10 steps ahead of our competition here in Southern California. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Well done. Well done. And I know he mentioned on many instances how LBCT is the biggest here and the largest that in the country, in the world. I would add in the galaxy, Anthony, in the galaxy. We got to think big, really big. So far, we've heard from an economist, an exporter, an importer, a shipping line, and you just heard from a marine terminal operator. And you've heard from them collectively how we as an industry are navigating a changing global economy, massive consolidation, environmental regulation, and supply chain disruption vis-a-vis e-commerce and other forms of delivering goods. So I hope you're getting a sense of how the supply chain is coming together as a true ecosystem and trying to align the handoff points to ensure that we provide the reliability and the efficiency that all of you have come to expect. Technology has come up. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach are currently working with General Electric on a program that helps to facilitate and disseminate some of that data and some of that information to ensure that it reaches those decision makers so that they can make real-time decisions. So again, Anthony, thank you for that perspective. Now we're going to hear about the key role that railroads play in the supply chain, speeding intermodal goods across the nation. And our speaker this morning is Beth Whited. She's the Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for Union Pacific Railroad. Beth was appointed Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer in December of 2016, responsible for Union Pacific's 4 major business units, which are agriculture, premium, energy, and industrial. She also oversees a railroad's customer care and support team, as well as a subsidiary, Loop Logistics. Since joining UP in 1987, Beth has served in a variety of roles, including Vice President and General Manager for Chemicals, Vice President of the Railroad's National Customer Service Center, President of UP Distribution Services subsidiary, and other roles in strategic planning, investor relations, finance, sales, and marketing. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Beth Whited.
So, everybody else has been talking about how long the company that they work for has been around. So Union Pacific was established in 1862, 155 years. And our tagline is Building America. So if you think about that, we've been talking a lot about trade today, We've been talking a lot about interconnectivity, and if you think about building America, that means a little bit of everything along those lines. We're definitely very focused on the fact that we serve America, but we understand that international trade is a key part of who America is today. Globalization will not stop. So we're proud of our role in enabling that global trade footprint in the United States. And you'll see that on our next slide here that shows what our franchise looks like. It's got a lot of little pieces on it, but I would highlight for you the little yellow triangles, which are the ports that we serve. So we serve a significant number of West Coast ports. We also serve a number of Gulf Coast ports, and that trade continues to grow for us. You'll see the international intermodal be a large piece of our intermodal footprint. We're probably about 55% domestic, 45% intermodal, and it's a very substantial part of our business mix. You know, we're about a $20 billion company. Somebody came up with these fun little icons. You'll see he talked about our business mix, but that crane that you see is premium, and that's a split between automotive and intermodal. Lion's share of that would be intermodal, and like I said, we're split pretty evenly between domestic and international intermodal, so we have a long, important relationship with the ports. A lot of our focus is on the international markets and how we enable growth in those markets, and we provide a solution for customers such as the BCOs you've heard from today and our intermodal intermediary partners to get goods and services into the core of the country. So if I talk just a little bit about the rail industry, because obviously we're not the only one who serves the ports on the West Coast or East Coast, et cetera, you see that the rail industry volume this year is up about 1%. So relatively flat. There's some positives in there. There's always yings and yangs. But if you look to the right side, you'll see intermodal 7-day car loadings are up about 6% year over year. We are seeing strength in international intermodal, but we're also seeing domestic intermodal growing. I think you'll probably hear more about this as we get to the next speaker, but definitely we are seeing the impact of ELDs in the United States. I think coming into 2018, we were really expecting that impact to be, call it 5%, and it feels like it's much more intense than that. For the most part, we would consider our container fleet on the domestic part relatively sold out. There's been a lot of demand for intermodal this year, and I think it's really coming from that truck tightness. So we will continue to focus on investments in our container fleet. We'll be working with our international intermodal partners on the right things to do from their container fleet perspective. Somebody earlier referenced the fact that a lot of those containers come back to the ports of LA, Long Beach, and the other West Coast ports empty for the international intermodal fleet. We think we have some solutions where we can reload them with this increased demand for domestic intermodal. They get an intermediate load some way on their trek back to the port of LA, Long Beach to go off back to China or wherever in Asia they came from. So there's opportunities for us to work together there and get better utilization of the fleet and meet the needs of the shippers. So one of the things that railroads can do the most in order to support peak season demand and other demands for our resources is make investments. And investments can come in a lot of different ways, but the thing that people think of most, of course, is investment in the resources that support the network. So be that locomotives, freight cars, containers, line of road, terminals, intermodal facilities. Certainly, Union Pacific is spending quite a bit of money this year in Southern California on intermodal facilities. If you've been to downtown LA lately, you'll see that we've been spending quite a bit of time and money on our intermodal facility downtown to update that and give us some more capacity in that location. But if you look at the whole industry, in the last 25 years or so, we spent over $635 billion of investment back into our infrastructure, and I think that number works out to be something like 40% of every revenue dollar. So it's a very substantial investment. We are very capital intensive as an industry. We maintain our own infrastructure. We build our own new infrastructure. So that's an area where we all focus in terms of meeting the demands of our customers, and in this case specifically the intermodal shippers and international intermodal in particular. We also can do things to help reduce variability in our network, which gives us the opportunity to enhance availability, gives you more capacity. Lots of ways to do that, a lot of them with technology, and I'll give you some technology advancements here in a second. And obviously asset management is a key part. The bigger ships have been, the combination of the steamship lines and the bigger ships are an interesting challenge for everybody in that supply chain, the ports, as well as the railroads and the other people who provide transportation services. We've definitely seen, as those alliances have shaken out, smaller concentrations going into multiple locations, which makes it harder to build trains. So that's been a challenge for us. I think as they continue to shake out, that will get better and better over time. But certainly I believe that has been a challenge over the last couple of years, getting the most efficient utilization of the rail asset, and probably the port assets as well, as those alliances have come together and determined which ports they're going to call on and what quantity. I'm just going to touch briefly on some other capacity solutions that we have been putting in place at UP particularly, and it's an attempt by us to provide an excellent customer experience and the value that customers want. I think it touches on a few things that you've heard from other speakers. One of those items is really around visibility. We know that we're this much of a supply chain for most of the shippers who their total supply chain is that. And we need to find ways to participate in projects like the program that the ports of LA and Long Beach are working on together to get visibility from the ships across the water through the ports, and we believe a natural extension is onto the railroads. And so we've been in close conversation with the ports and GE about that. We also have our own tools for customers that are local to us to see visibility of their shipment, and we're very willing to work with people to feed that data right back into their own planning systems if that's helpful to them. We've been developing a lot of API solutions for that. So if you're a BCO out there and you're interested in participating in that with us, please reach out to your sales team. We're also spending a lot of time because people want to know when we're going to show up on a smart ETA solution that takes some machine learnings and artificial intelligence capabilities and helps us give a much closer estimate of when your train and your car is going to arrive. We actually are rolling out pilots, some beta testers starting next week on that smart ETA. It has drastically improved our ability to forecast train arrival times, and I think it will be a next level change for customers in terms of their ability to predict the availability of their goods. And then you heard Plastics Express talk about capacity in the Gulf in particular. We've developed a tool to that end because there is so much more volume coming on from some of these plastic shippers, and it really works in the international space as well. We believe that Dallas is going to be a solution for those westbound shipments of those plastics pellets that hopefully nobody ate. And I don't know what you're going to do with them. If you take them home, you could probably melt them down and make yourself a little cup or something. But anyway, because that's what all your cups are made out of, by the way. Actually, all your plastic bags are made out of those pellets. But anyway, we've developed a capacity manager tool to try to maximize the capabilities of our franchise in the Gulf Coast. Union Pacific actually has access to every one of those 19 facilities that are coming online, and we're already starting to see those volumes come. But as you can expect, you've got the guy who makes the pellets, you've got the guy who packages the pellets, you've got us doing the transportation in between, you've got somebody trying to bring a container, maybe it's in Houston, maybe it's in Dallas, and if anybody is oversubscribing that supply chain, it's really easy to get into a gridlock situation. So we've developed an internal tool that we're sharing with all the members of the supply chain to say, hey, where's the product right now? And are we over capacity or under capacity, and how do we identify other options for who can do that packaging for you, or whatever the case may be. So we really want to be an active participant in improving the supply chain for the customers and providing that value that makes them want to use Union Pacific as well as the other members of the supply chain. So I'm going to turn it over. I've got a red blinking light here. I appreciate the invitation to appear here today, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Beth, thank you so much for that excellent presentation and really the focus on the solutions that UP is developing to support our intermodal gateway. As a matter of fact, approximately 27% of all inbound containers that arrive in our port leave the terminals via rail. So intermodal partnerships and solutions are key, and we're working on developing that even further in the years ahead. But that means that today the balance of that, the vast majority of containers that arrive into our port leave our terminals via truck, which is where our next stop in the supply chain brings us. And that's drayage and trucking with our next speaker, Ken Kellaway. Ken is co-founder, president, and CEO of RoadOne Intermodal Logistics, one of the country's leading providers of intermodal transportation, container terminal operations, and related logistics services. Ken was one of also the founders of RoadLink, the largest provider of intermodal trucking and workforce solutions in the U.S. from 2000 to 2012. And he also founded eFill America, a leader in the national warehousing, distribution, and e-commerce fulfillment business that offers more than 15 locations and 50 million square feet of distribution logistics capacity. A lifelong and true entrepreneur, Ken founded Kellaway Intermodal and Distribution Systems in 1981, growing the business from a standalone warehousing company to New England's premier intermodal transportation and terminal services operation. Ken, thanks for being here.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it, folks. Thanks for having me. They always say once everybody's playing nice in the playhouse here, you have to bring in the Boston drayage guy to rough things up a little bit. So, and I can't live much longer, so I'm not going to go for long-term gratification. We're going to go for instant gratification, Mario. So thanks for having me. A lot to cover, a lot going on in the drayage space, as everybody knows. So let's start off with a quick intro to our business, if we can, and what we do. I think we're driving here. Am I offline here on the tablet? Next one. Oh, there we go. Okay, thanks. So a little about RoadOne. I think we got a nice introduction by Noel, and I appreciate that. So we're a national intermodal trucking company based out of Boston, but we run over 43 locations. We're up over 1,500 trucks today. Just finished our 4th acquisition last week, which brought another 150 trucks into our fleet. So very excited about that. We'd run a combination of both domestic intermodal off the rail ramps, as well as we're one of the largest port drayage companies in the United States as well. Run about 200 trucks up and down the West Coast here. Karen Ziemers, our vice president out here, does a great job for us. So we participate in this market out here. We're excited to be in this market out here, and it's been a very nice opportunity for us. We also run container depots around the country for various steamship lines, and we also run dedicated fleets for not only international importers, but also for domestic companies around the country as well. As Noel also highlighted, we have a national warehousing division called eFill America, where we do warehousing, distribution, and transloading. And we also try and empower entrepreneurs in the drayage space, so we have 2 agent-based models also, U.S. Intermodal Logistics and American Intermodal Logistics, that are managed by individual independent agents around the country. I'm a little sticky here for some reason. We go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So a lot going on the marketplace. You've heard a lot of things about bigger vessels coming in play, of course, and a whole host of things with chassis changes and what have you. And all of that does have an impact on drayage, as we know. The bigger vessels are causing big spikes in the market, of course, larger discharges off the vessel, more demand on chassis, more demand on trucks in the marketplace, and creates a lot of challenges, a lot of vessel realignment. Larry talked a little bit about continual realignment will continue to come, displaces equipment in multiple terminals, also creates challenges in our space. We're all seeing e-commerce. E-commerce is driving some realignment in the marketplace all over the country. More coastal transloading taking place. Shorter lengths to haul into more coastal transload facilities is changing the dynamic on drayage as well. Southeastern U.S., one of the reasons we're here today is because we are a national provider. We're seeing significant growth in the southeastern United States, a market where the drayage capacity wasn't really that strong and where the driver base wasn't really that strong. So we've had to work very hard to realign down there and attract drivers and make it an exciting place for them to work as well. A lot of inland rail locations we're seeing on the West Coast. On the East Coast. The railroads out there, I won't mention their names because Beth is with us today, but the short line railroads out on the East Coast are doing a lot of evacuation of product off of the ports, going into small short line rail operations up into places like Greer and Dillon, South Carolina, where they want to evacuate the ships faster, get that cargo up into remote locations, 150, 200 miles off dock, and that's causing us to have to realign our networks there as well in order to handle that. Of course, a lot of focus on clean trucks. You guys advocated that years ago. You've done an amazing job. A lot of pressure on the drayage community to get to those goals, but it is the right thing, certainly, for the long-term sustainability of the business. And we're seeing that pressure now develop in other markets, and we have to react to that pressure, and we will. And we always say every time that the FMCSA comes up with a three-letter acronym, it takes and impacts capacity. So they have a lot of acronyms out there, of course. We saw Hours of Service. We've seen CSA, and now we are here at ELD, which we're going to talk about the impact, of course, and it is having a significant impact on the marketplace. Next slide, please. I think I'm off of this one. So what's the biggest challenge in drayage today? Highly, highly fragmented marketplace, of course. We've watched everybody speak so far, all multi-billion-dollar market caps for the most part, big infrastructure investment into terminals, into vessels, into rail, but yet in the middle of all of this is the weakest link in the supply chain when there is not one company in the United States that does over $500 million in revenue in drayage today, which is a big staggering issue today. We as RoadOne, a little over $250 million in revenue today, sit as number 1 or 2 in the country, and that scares me, the fact that we're number 1 or 2 in the country, not because we're not a great company, but because from a capital standpoint, we're so much smaller than everybody else around us in the marketplace. So, and when you get below us, extremely fragmented business, of course, all run by small tier mom and pop companies. A lot of them great operators, a lot of them great entrepreneurs, a lot of great business operators, but very difficult to keep up with the capital requirements to meet the demands in the marketplace. And you also have a succession issue going on. Most of us in the business, I know George Boyle here and a few others, is fortunate to have his son in it, like my son, but a lot of families don't want to take over the business. They've watched their fathers work too hard, and these kids don't want to do it anymore. So a lot of succession planning issues going on in drayage right now to see where is the business going to go, who's going to run these things in the future. Next slide, please. So what's going on out in this sector? Of course, a lot of retirements going on in the marketplace, and it is causing a lot of challenges in recruiting and retention in the drayage space. ATA expects we're going to need over 100,000 new hires every year just to keep pace with what we have, let alone gain any traction. A lot of departures in the marketplace from retirement. Average age now is almost 57 years old, and that's a challenge when the drivers are older than I am now. And by the way, whoever gave I started 87, not 81. You're making me really look bad now. Yeah. But so the drivers are getting older, and we're not replacing them fast enough, so it's a big challenge, of course. They have a lot more options that I'll talk about in just a second. There's a lot more options for the drivers in the marketplace today, and they're taking advantage of them, and we need to be concerned about that. Again, more risk out in the marketplace as we see more and more FMCSA control and regulation. Drivers are getting more selective what they want to handle. I bet if I asked Larry how easy it was to get drivers today to handle his hazmat and his overweight and his refrigerated cargo, I would bet he'd tell me it's a challenge right now. And mostly because when you put that hazmat placard on the side of your truck, you are a target, and the driver is going to get inspected whether he likes it or not. So it's becoming a challenge to get them in specialized products and commodities, of course. The economy is expanding in multiple markets, as we know, and I'm going to talk about the Uberization issue and others today. But big bottom line is we expect to have a 200,000 truck driver shortage by 2020. It's real and it's happening, and we're all trying to move our way through it right now. So what are the other options out there today? There are better paying jobs for intermodal drivers today, and we're seeing them, and we are causing a lot of these issues ourselves. I look at the statistics now. There are 85 million Amazon Prime users in the country today. There's only 222 million licensed drivers today. So over a third of everybody in the country that's a licensed driver decides not to drive anymore, and they want to just order it online while watching Netflix and have it delivered. Well, that's great conceptually, but every time that happens, I yell at my wife because that's one less driver I have for intermodal trucking. So there are other options today. Online commerce, Uber, I use Uber Black a lot. I'm sure a lot of you do. Every time I'm in that Uber Black, I talk to the driver about what is he making net after fuel, after vehicle. He's making more than my tractor driver that's paying somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 for his truck. These guys are netting $5,000 to $7,000 a month. They have no regulatory control. There's no hours of service. There's no drug testing. There's no significant control for a lot of those drivers from an FMCSA standpoint. So a lot of guys are migrating into this space, and the only way we keep them is to make it more attractive to be in the drayage space. Next slide, thanks. ELD, I'm sure we'll get some questions when we get up on the panel. It has been a significant impact, I think more than anybody anticipated. And people say, well, why is it worse than people anticipated? I said, because people really didn't know what was going on behind the curtain. Being in the space, being an acquirer of companies, we know what's going on behind the curtain. And there are a lot of great transportation companies out there that worked very hard to get the drivers to adhere to the regulations, but it's very difficult to police. And the regulations are somewhat complex, and they're somewhat difficult to follow as well. So we've seen a big impact on it. More drivers are exiting than we anticipated because they can go to other sectors they don't have such regulatory control over, and it's a challenge. We need more incentives for the drivers, of course. So we're seeing a reduction in capacity. We're seeing a reduction in driver qualifications. Last year, every driver that came into RoadOne, we hired almost 800 drivers last year based on turnover. 36% got approved last year in 2017. We're under 16% so far year to date. Quality of driver is declining, getting more difficult to get them through our qualification process. Next slide, please. Just hit it. So some positive news about ELDs. Beth and I were just talking about it, that some of the positive news is for the first time ever, we actually have onboard devices in every one of the trucks. So it does give better KPI reporting. We can see those delayed times. We'll be able to see whether that Port of Long Beach turn time is really 48 minutes or not in about a month or so here. So it's so we can actually see activity and KPIs in the truck itself, which is good. For the first time, we can actually do that. And it also gives us status updates, and we're doing this nationwide now as RoadOne, that we can tell you through geofencing when the truck arrives, automatic status updates at the facilities, and we can also send our customers messages and KPIs as well, and status updates. Okay, next. One of the things we're doing aggressively now is we're moving into more and more dedicated fleets. We adamantly support the owner-operator independent contractor model. It's a great model. There are a lot of good first-generation immigrants and others that are in this model that have done great things for this country and great things for our marketplace as independent operators, but we think it needs to be a blended strategy. We're going to continue to support that model. We're also going to continue to bring on more company trucks and try and hot seat those vehicles and get more dedicated solutions. We look at all the capital expenses that people are spending on all sides of the market. You need to invest in your drayage partners. You need to secure capacity. And this is one of the ways we're doing it, by putting in brand new, clean trucks, dedicated models for specific customers. I'm getting flashier, so I'm going to go pretty quickly here. I apologize. California, you guys doing a lot of great things. We admire what you're doing. It taxes us, of course, to try and keep pace with where you're going. We were just asked that under your CARB regulations, allocate as much money as you can to the weakest link in your supply chain. That's drayage. So of the 398, Mario, please think favorably upon us. So, but I can see as an outsider, I've been coming here for 30 years, and honestly, you can see the difference in your environment. You can see the marine layer dissipate. You can see that the environment is a better place to be. So I commend you for what you've been able to do here. But to get there, the drayage economics have to change. We need to get more revenue to the truck, and it comes in not only price increases, but more importantly, fluidity improvement. That if you look at what the drivers pay today, average driver without maintenance is paying about $1,000 per month for his $40,000 to $50,000 used vehicle. For us to get to these clean truck programs, Tesla, programs like that we all think are innovative and creative for the future, you need to see a dramatic increased lift in efficiency and rates in order to get there, and we think it will happen. I apologize, I'm going to move quick here, but next slide, please. There we go. So we need a paradigm shift. We need to get the drayage companies to the table. A lot of big systemic changes in the marketplace taking place. We need to be at the table to make sure they don't negatively impact driver capacity and impact the overall supply chain. We need the drivers to be treated like customers when they're at a terminal, when they're at a customer. Even in our own internal locations, we put pressure on our people to treat these drivers better. They're so critical to us. We need to treat them better even internally within our own organization. Consistency of service. This is a static business, not a dynamic business. No drivers show up extra on Tuesdays and Thursdays because the vessel came in. It doesn't happen. They're there every day. They want to work every day. They want to work consistent every week. So we need to try and bring as much consistency to that as we possibly can. We need improved fluidity, street turns, a major component in the marketplace, a big opportunity we all think in the marketplace where there's not enough street turns taking place. And view drivers positively. We've all talked negatively about truck drivers all our lives, including myself, and I own one, not about drivers, just about being a driver, and we need to change that paradigm. It is a good place for people to work. They can make a lot of money and they can do some great things there. Everybody needs to stand behind their own issues, of course. We continue to wrestle with per diem and detention charges. The quick economics in drayage, and anybody in the room can probably validate this that's in the drayage business, this is a 5% EBITDA business if it's all going well. If you're doing on average $300 for a move, you're making $15 on that move. 1 day detention on a container takes you 10 more moves to break even. It's a significant issue for us. We need everybody to step up and help support it. One more here, I think. So it's real. The driver shortage is systemic. We have to try and figure ways to try and cure it and turn it. We need to be an attractive place for people to work. And we, of course, need to help drive margins and improve driver pay through fluidity and through improvements and a whole host of things. A lot of opportunities out there, a lot of solutions out there. I know GE is working on a big visibility tool, which is very important, so we can all get collaborative visibility and see where equipment is. There's another group, Reed Kidd, I think, is here somewhere. He's leading a new charge for a group called eDray, which we're going to support and try and become one of the collaborative partners in. There's a quick slide here on that. eDray is a collaborative port logistics model. You'll start learning and seeing more about this. We think it's one of the biggest ideas in the marketplace in a long time, but it means we have to change our mantra. Drayage companies can't fight against each other. We have to work together collaboratively to help support each other and help move the containers off the port in a more collaborative fashion. Multiple clients, multiple draymen supporting each other to move the equipment through the terminals faster. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Ken, thank you so much. I feel a lot more educated about trucking issues. You've delivered a lot of good information in a very condensed time period. Thanks again. Because our goal is always to continue to add value to this program, we've added a new feature this year. In fact, this year in our lineup, we have someone we've named a futurist. Whereas most people are afraid to pull out the crystal ball and tell us what they see, our next speaker is not. In fact, I think it was Yogi Berra who once said, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. Well, Larry's not afraid. And when we talk about the future, we're not talking about next year or next 5 years. We're talking way deep into the future. Larry's a 38-year veteran of the freight transportation sector and is a president and founder of Gross Transportation Consulting of Durango, Colorado, an independent consulting practice focusing on freight transportation matters. He's an acknowledged expert on intermodal matters who is quoted often in the press and makes frequent appearances before the transportation community. His column, Landlines, appears monthly in the Journal of Commerce, and he's also the author and creator of Intermodal In Depth, an analytical newsletter covering all aspects of the intermodal sector. Please welcome our futurist for today, Larry Gross.
Well, thank you, Noel, and good morning, everybody. I appreciate the port, that kind introduction. I appreciate the port having me here, and I appreciate most of all being bestowed with that very cool title of futurist. Because normally I'm a forecaster, and that just means I look a year or two out, so in 12 months you'll know that I was wrong. But now it's going to take you 10 years to figure out that I was wrong. So I kind of like that plan. I'm, as Noel said, I'm a sole practitioner specializing in intermodal matters, but if you're going to understand what's happening in intermodal, well, you need to know what's happening in the trucking world, you need to know what's happening in rail, you need to know what's happening in maritime, and you need to know what's happening in trade. So we tend to look beyond just the intermodal arena. Noel stole my thunder here, but I do know, I think one reason why they invited me in particular as the futurist is because it was an economy move, because they don't have to rent a crystal ball when they have me here. I come equipped with my own right here. So I'm going to run through, in a very quick fashion, 4 slides that are going to talk about my view, our view, of what's going to be happening 10 years from now. And we're going to start off with, I'll call it the global trends that drive everything. And then we'll go down and spend one slide, very quick, rapid-fire fashion, one slide on the maritime side, one side on rail, on trucking, and one side on rail. But this is what's going to drive everything here, is what's happening in the global trends. And we've heard a lot about that this morning already. One of the global trends is we want it now. We want it fast, we want it reliably, we want it quickly. So that is the environment that all of us are operating in. Now, the product that we are producing, transportation services, there's a continuing demand to make that ever more efficient. Continuous improvement is the mantra. And that makes a ton of sense, except one of the things that happens when you operate at ever higher levels of capacity utilization is that resiliency, or the ability to rebound, becomes a challenge. And we are seeing that in most sectors in the transportation world. We're certainly seeing it in trucking right now. Anybody that's been on an airplane and knows there are no empty seats left, when you have a disruption in the system, a weather event, or something unexpected, it takes days to recover, or even weeks to recover. And that's the situation across the board, because nobody is going to put surge capacity in right now if they're not getting paid for it. We think in the long run, the economy's freight content, the percentage of our GDP that's accounted for by the supply chain, is actually going to go down. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily freight's going to go down, but as a percentage of the total, it's going to go down. And here are some of the reasons why. Automation, we saw the automation, the awesome automation in the terminal, the new terminal that's being built. Well, that's typical across the country of manufacturing facilities. 3D printing. And in general, the production is going to start to move closer to the point of consumption, because that eliminates some of that uncertainty in the supply chain that we heard about from our BCO speaker. We think nearshoring or reshoring, call it what you will in 10 years, will really be underway in a significant way. And I look at earlier today, we have plastic pellets going from here to China in order to be converted into learning products that are coming back in to the United States. Now, when we have all kinds of robotics and 3D printing, is that going to make sense 10 years from now? It'll make sense for some things, but I think some of that is going to migrate back here. And then, of course, we have this very big question mark in terms of the overall protectionism or nationalism trend that's not just here in the States, but globally. And how much impact will that have? Well, I can't predict that. I just want to get it on the radar screen. So let's talk about ocean freight. Well, if you believe what I just told you, then it looks like volume is not going to be growing quite as fast as it is today, or certainly as it was in years past. And so the competitive landscape is going to get ever more demanding. What are going to be some of the responses to that? Well, the first question is, can the ocean carriers resist the urge to continue to pour more capacity into the system than the marketplace demands? And that's a real open question, because that will determine whether or not the business gets completely commoditized or not. I think you're going to see somewhat of a retreat on the part of the ocean carriers, away from inland carriage, just concentrating on the port-to-port aspects of their business, which is where they really specialize. We're seeing a lot of pressure right now from the kinds of things that Ken was talking about. We're seeing a lot of pressure on store-door delivery. We're seeing a lot of pressure on chassis involvement. Is that going to continue the status quo 10 years from now? I think not. I think that there's going to be a disengagement on the part of the ocean carriers from that. Megaships, well, I think we're going to see that wave crest, and then we're going to see it begin to decline a little bit. The average size of the new ships that are being acquired, you can see it happening in the airline business. We had the 747, we have the A380, the big Airbus plane, which has been sort of a commercial failure, where the focus now is on smaller planes that can go directly, the 787 or the 777, for instance. And we're going to see more differentiation among the ocean carriers, differentiation in terms of their services and their ease of use, not just cost. I'm going to click on through here. Trucking, I think the big change here is semi-autonomous trucks. And we need to focus on the intermediate steps, not necessarily the fully autonomous trucks that are making all the headlines today, but there's an intermediate step that I think is going to have a profound impact, and that's called platooning. And that's where two trucks are operating in formation down the interstate highway, in very, very close proximity to one another, but it's still safe because the trailing truck is communicating with the lead truck on a real-time basis electronically. So the throttle and the brake on the second truck is being controlled by the driver in the first truck, and all what the second truck's driver is doing is steering. The value of that is fuel savings. The second truck saves about 10% of its fuel. The lead truck saves about 4%. But where that's going to come to pass is once, and these are being piloted now, these are formations like this will be in commercial service on the highway beginning this year. But where that has an impact in the long run is that it's going to, as folks get used to it and as this technology gets demonstrated, it's going to become more obvious that the driver in that second truck doesn't have to be on duty all the time. And first he'll be working on his computer, or she'll be working on her computer, or maybe taking a nap. And then eventually it'll be where the second driver is resting while the first driver is driving. And then after 8 hours, they'll switch. So what will happen then is you'll no longer have any rest time along the way. The convoy or the platoon will continue to move towards destinations. So you'll get team-type service, much faster service, lower labor cost, and the productivity of the truck and the trailer are going to be almost doubled because they don't stop to rest. So this is going to create a downward force on trucking rates. Trucking rates will peak during this current driver shortage, and then at least on the long-haul side, not necessarily in Ken's arena, the short-haul, but on the long-haul side, you'll start to see them going down. And so that will put a lot of pressure on other parts of the supply chain. We'll talk about that in a minute. I think this as bad as this current truck capacity situation is, and I'm not necessarily making a prediction it's going to end anytime soon. I think it'll end sometime in 2019. But I think that will probably be, at least in my career, the last one, and it may be the last one ever because of some of these things that we're looking at. I'll go very quickly here. So now let's go over to my sweet spot, intermodal and rail, and obviously the competitive terrain that they're going to be operating in, that particularly intermodal is going to be operating in, is going to get to be much more demanding because of some of the things that I just referenced. And so intermodal and rail is going to have to step up their game. I was happy to hear from Beth some of the innovations that Union Pacific is doing, and I think the other Class 1s are doing as well, but we're definitely going to have to raise the level of game in order to be able to compete against these much more economical trucks that are going to be in the near future. That's going to be more of an issue on the shorter lengths of haul, let's say the eastern lengths of haul, rather than the stuff that's coming out of the port here going all the way to Chicago. The increased demand for responsiveness is going to challenge some of the things that are happening right now in intermodal in terms of running ever longer trains. I think particularly when you get into the shorter lengths of haul, putting together a 12,000-foot long train is not necessarily going to be the way to go on that. On the conventional carload side, again, unless there are changes in the way that we currently operate, and I know the railroads are racing to change, but that is going to be a requirement in order to sort of keep pace with what's happening right now in the rest of the world. And if they're not successful in that, then that piece of the puzzle, the non-unit train, sort of individual carloads going from A to B, that piece of the puzzle will decline unless there's a radical change that creates more usability and more reliability in that service and more predictability in that service. If that doesn't happen, then you're going to see, I think, a retreat more towards the unit train type of an arena. You know, the branch lines will continue to get spun out, whether to short lines or others. And maybe even it's conceivable to me that the marketing of the individual carload sector will get spun out, and the railroads, the Class 1s, will outsource that to the short lines, the regional railroads that have a lot more boots on the ground in terms of sales capabilities. So with that, let me get one more slide. Now I'm not able to advance it. Next slide, please. So this is my shameless plug. This is what we put out every month, an in-depth look, a deep dive on intermodal. Folks that that are interested in that. It's intermodalinDepth.com. We would love to have each and every one of you as a subscriber. And with that, next slide. I appreciate the chance to prognosticate, Noel. Thanks so much for indulging me here.
Larry, thank you so much. I knew you would do an excellent job as a futurist, and we certainly appreciate you sticking your head out here and doing so for us this morning. At this time, we're going to have our speakers come back up. They will be participating in a panel segment of our program. And by the way, the reason we wanted a futurist here is I remember reading a story about Wayne Gretzky. How many of you know Wayne Gretzky? The great Wayne Gretzky. I know it's not baseball, right? It's hockey. We're sharing. And Wayne was once asked what made him such a great hockey player. And his answer was very insightful. He said, the reason for that is because whereas most hockey players move towards where the puck is, Wayne Gretzky always moved towards where the puck was going to go. And that's why we had our futurist here. So next, it's my pleasure to introduce Bill Mangalusa from the Journal of Commerce. He is a senior editor for the Journal of Commerce from HS Market. He's a 30-year veteran of covering the shipping industry, providing leading journalistic coverage of trans-Pacific trade, intermodal rail, and ports, and is a frequent speaker at industry events and conferences. Bill joined the Journal of Commerce in 1980 as a New Orleans correspondent and moved to Long Beach in 1985 to open the Los Angeles Long Beach Bureau. He served as a JOC maritime editor in New York in 1992 and 93, and returned to Southern California in 1993. He's a Chicago native. He began his journalism career in 1972 as a reporter with the Times-Picayune in New Orleans. And besides the questions we received from those of you in the room, we'll also be fitting in the questions we received from the webcast. And when it does come time for questions from the audience, we encourage you to come to the microphones located there in the aisles so that we can all hear you. And before you do ask your question, we ask that you please identify yourself and let us know if your question is general or specific to one of our speakers. We'll also be answering questions that you sent on via social media, and I fully expect Bill will also have some questions of his own for the panel. So ladies and gentlemen, Bill Mangalusa and our panelists.
Thank you. Thanks, Noel, and I want to thank the Port of Long Beach on behalf of the Journal of Commerce for inviting me back to be your moderator. We really do want to be part of the port community. We want to add value to all of your businesses. So thank you for trusting us. Let's get right into the questions. And as Noel said, we've got a couple of microphones up here. So when you have a question, come to the microphone. I'll kick things off. But you know, let's keep the questions coming. We got 19 minutes and 39 seconds. Mario, thank you for being my colleague for so many years at the Journal of Commerce. Welcome back to Long Beach. The economic recovery now is pretty soon going to be the second longest in the history of the United States. How much longer can we expect this to continue?
Yes, there are many things that are playing in favor. Consumer spending continues to drive economic growth, supported by rising disposable incomes, supported by a very low unemployment rate, and also supported by rising household wealth. So the outlook is positive for this year, but certainly there are some risks that have arisen. And two risks come to mind. The number one is monetary policy. The Federal Reserve could either tighten monetary policy a little too much, or it could be a little too late, in which case inflation can get out of control. And that could derail the U.S. economic expansion. The second risk that comes to mind is trade war. If the United States deliberately or not enters into a trade war with Canada, Mexico, China, or the European Union, then there could certainly be, we could certainly see some damaging consequences for the U.S. economy overall. By some estimates, just by leaving NAFTA, the U.S. economic growth, it could be, some economies cut forecast by about 0.5 percentage point. So instead of growing 2.8% this year, could grow by 2.3 just by leaving NAFTA. So those are the two major risks. I mean, certainly it's difficult to to say whether this expansion is going to be the longest ever in history, but there are positive factors that are driving the economy in this year and beyond.
Thank you, Mario. Steve, you're talking about the explosion of resin production in the U.S. Gulf. Now, when Larry and Hyundai Merchant Marine look to enter new services into a trade lane, they don't base it on the export potential. They base it on the imports in that area. So we have 3 weekly services between Asia and the U.S. Gulf now. The resin exports, you would think, would say, well, gee, they could probably support more than 3 services per week, but you're talking about a commodity that doesn't pay nearly as much as the inbound. So does it look to you like what you see is what you get now, 3 services to the Gulf, and the increased production of resins in the Gulf is going to end up going to the 2 coasts, largely to the West Coast and LA Long Beach?
Yeah, well, I've also had customers reach out and want us to kind of give them an idea of what our strategy is from an export standpoint out of the Northeast and also through the Southeast, right? So taking a look at the volumes and the just sheer volume of it, I think there's opportunities across the board, even for conversations around the Port of Stockton, for instance, looking for different ways of handling this volume. So I think everything is on the table for sure.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Dan, oh wait, do we have a question there? Yes.
Yes, I do have a question, actually. My name's Jerry. I'm with DHL Global Forwarding. My question's for the panel. One of the things we're seeing, in our area of the entire scope here is in communication with the BCOs. There's just this constant pressure to keep the costs as low as possible. And I'd say unreasonably low in many cases. I mean, you talk to any BCO today, they're going to tell you, my top priority is keeping costs low. Pretty much everything we've spoken about here today has been about rising costs, and unless we can innovate to find other ways to decrease our servicing costs, the consumer is going to have to pay for this if there's an increase that we have to, pass on to the consumer. But I mean, what role or what solutions do you think the community needs to take in order to make it a sustainable market for all the players involved? I mean, from our end, just sourcing and selling is just an extreme challenge given the priorities that our customers have. And as we're seeing with ELD and other challenges, costs are increasing. So just again, for the panel, what insights can you share in terms of where's this pressure, where's the relief on this price pressure going to come from?
Dan, do you want to start with that? That looks
sure.
Like
let me begin by saying that I have a lot of empathy for the logistics community because that's the business I was in almost my whole life, freight forwarding, customs brokerage, NVO, the whole deal. I think the fundamental issue is that there's too much competition. We talk about pressure on carrier rates in the Trans-Pacific eastbound, yet you have 6 14,000 TEU ships coming into the trade. That's, I don't want to say it's crazy, but it's a little difficult to understand. There are over 6,000 licensed NVOCCs in the United States battling for $25 a box. There are 30,000 licensed customs brokers in this country, of which I am one, fighting $50, $75 an entry. I hate to say it, it's economics 101, and when supply exceeds demand, it becomes a buyer's market, has been and will continue to be. So to answer the question, where's the relief going to come from? It isn't.
Wow. Well, gee, we're going to better talk to a futurist to get a rebuttal on that one.
The future is bleak. The future is bleak. But
I'm in the wrong business.
I think that at least when you look at what's happening on the trucking side, in particular right now, the folks that are buying transportation for the BCOs in a lot of cases have never experienced a true capacity shortage. And so they're not necessarily equipped right now, and they're learning fast, with the tools where you just don't go out onto the internet or go into the spot market, and you're going to find your capacity. The cost of missing a load vastly exceeds the economic impact to a BCO of paying a little bit more on the rate. And when you get into a scenario, which we are dangerously flirting with right now, where you actually just can't get your load moved, then rates go up exponentially because you'll do anything to get that load moved. So I think we're in a period right now where, at least on the land side of things, the tools, this continuous improvement sort of focus and keeping the costs down is going to have to give way to a more capacity-oriented approach. And so I think you may see a little bit of that pressure, at least in the near term, ease up.
I can comment, Bill.
Yes, please, Ken.
Yeah, so a couple of things we're working on to that venue, of course, are, fluidity and improved turn time through the terminals is always important. If we can get more turns, we can keep our total cost more reasonable, of course. But two other things we're working on is, again, to Larry's point, we're talking to our clients about total landed costs door to door. We look at per diem charges, demurrage charges, things such as that, that if not forecasted properly, if people aren't managing their demand and capacity properly, they're actually paying more in the back end than trying to obtain a low cost rate on the front end. So, we're trying to put more and more dedicated fleets, as I highlighted earlier, into the system, trying to explain to our clients that overall your total cost is going to come down. You're going to have more predictable capacity that you can deal with. You can get rid of some of these costs. The other thing that we're looking at aggressively, of course, is matchbacks. We think one of the biggest opportunities still in the marketplace, we run 1 million miles a week at RoadOne, and 42% of those miles are empty. And that is because we are having a difficult time, as the industry has, trying to find that common visibility portal that everybody can go to try and understand where can we street turn, where can we street turn resin, when that equipment is already out in the Inland Empire. How do we reload that CMA or Hyundai box or whatever it may be? And instead, we're passing in the night constantly because all exports are based on a port rate and 70% of the imports are on an inbound door rate today as it stands. So we think street turns is a huge opportunity to improve efficiencies for everybody.
Okay, I think we have a question here. Thank you all.
My question is, my name is Farah Farhang and I'm a Long Beach resident. My question is, when do you expect IoT to come to the port trucks and the ships, and how will that affect the cost?
Actually, I didn't quite understand you said, when do you expect what to come to the port?
Internet of Things.
Oh, the Internet of Things to come to the port.
You're doing that now.
I'll tell you what, can I handle that one for you? Yeah, and we've heard it mentioned here that there are port portals that are being developed, and they actually are being developed much quicker here than in other parts of the country. So you have the Port of Los Angeles GE Transportation Portal. That has actually been piloted for a year now, and it's expanding throughout the Port of LA, and 2 terminals in Long Beach are picking up on it this year. We also have Advent Technologies. They have their own portal based on eModal. So the beauty of those is it will take all of these different technological tools that are out there for the truckers, for the terminals, for the BCOs, for the warehouse operators, and give everybody a single window to share this information in a secure environment. And so to answer your question, when is it coming? It's happening right now, and I think you'll see a lot more progress this year. So, okay. Very good. Well, let's keep, thanks for your question. Let's keep moving on. Larry Burns, oh, wait, do we have another? Oh, I'm sorry. Another question. Okay.
A slightly related question, Ann Carpenter, Braid Theory. So my question to all the panelists is, in light of what you just mentioned about the supply chain initiatives, supply chain optimization initiatives, and all of the talk and buzz around blockchain and implementing blockchain technology, how much in real dollars, real effort are your companies putting into actually building capacity to support these technologies?
That's a very good question. Well, go on, Larry.
Yeah, I'll just begin to address it. I know as carriers that Hyundai is investing in and testing both its blockchain and its Internet of Things technologies. We've already began moving containers through these test models to see at what level we can develop them. Obviously, it's a very huge industry, the amount of containers that we have moving around the world, and to collect all the data that all of those containers would be required to become as data, as well as the contents inside the containers to become data, is going to be an incredible effort, and it's going to take a number of years to get there. But the testing, as Bill had mentioned before, is already being done. So there is quite a bit of an investment from the carrier side, and I would expect that we would be able to implement a good share of this within the next 2 to 5 years.
Yeah, I would say that the U.S. freight railroads may be undertaking currently one of the most massive Internet of Things spending events that is being seen anywhere in the world, which is the implementation of positive train control. So you have wayside detectors that are being put along railroad network all across the United States that will be able to effectively stop a train in an unsafe situation. So I think we are learning a lot from that. It's pretty complicated because you have to be interoperable with all the other railroads. All the locomotives have to be able to talk to each other. You have to be able to talk to everybody's microwave towers, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something like a $20 billion investment across the United States rail infrastructure. I think it will help us learn a lot of things about how you move forward in terms of being able to use autonomy technology and all those sorts of things as you move into the future.
And Anthony, you described very well the cargo handling automation technology. Are you doing anything to connect your terminal operating system with the BCOs, the truckers, and others where you could share information and help them predict when their container will be available for delivery, et cetera?
Yeah, we've worked for a long time to make sure that both our information portal, our trucker appointment system was as user-friendly as possible, working with the trucking industry to make sure that the tools that we are providing to our customers and to the outside are kind of the gold standard right now, we believe. We're going to continue to grow on that. We're also part of the pilot program with GE for an overall portal for the port system. We'll see how that progresses, but we'll be on the leading edge of that as well. I think you'll see more and more that happen. We've been working with the idea of predictive availability, which is difficult. You know, in the terminal operation, to be able to say that, okay, a vessel that arrives next week, the container should be available roughly so many hours or so many days after its arrival in order to have a longer time in which to be able to better plan your warehouse and distribution is a difficult and moving target in the maritime or in the terminal operation space. But we are working on being able to pin that down and be able to offer some form of predictive availability, which is something that I think is lacking.
Thanks, Anthony. Maybe one more aspect of this, and we'll finish that question. Ken, what about geofencing the terminal? GeoStamp does that here. You can look at a certain terminal and see precisely where the bottleneck is, whether it's at the gate, within the yard, or whatever. Do you see that type of technology being used more and more?
Yeah, I think one of the, as I mentioned earlier, one of the good things that's happened, of course, with ELDs is all of us have put onboard technology into the trucks. Some of the systems only do the ELD recording. We went further with it because we own our own proprietary technology. We interfaced it into our systems, and so now we have full KPI reporting. We can geofence locations. We can track time from the time we're in the queue to the time we're through the gate and back out of the queue. Because as we know on the drayage side, we look at things different than the terminal in some instances. Port turn time is always important, and we appreciate the improvements there, but we're really looking at it from the time the driver starts the cycle, how quick he get in and out of that. And we're measuring it today. We're providing that detail to our customers, and it's become increasingly important with hours of service, because one of the biggest challenges we're seeing with hours of service is that most of the supply chain network in this country was designed 10, 15 years ago. And back then, most of us terminal operators, everything was pre-mounted on a chassis, ready to go out gate. No slight to the operators, it's just the way it's evolved. Of course, the steamship lines divested themselves of the chassis, and of course, everybody went to grounded operations on both rail and ports. But the cycle time has increased dramatically, not because people aren't trying, not because everybody isn't trying to get as much fluidity as possible, but it's a change in process. So now what used to be able to be done at 300 miles one way outside of a terminal now has to come back into 200 miles. So you see this dramatic realignment. You start to see relay points. You're seeing a whole host of changes that have to take place to make sure this compliance stays.
Thanks, Ken. Larry Burns, just when the carriers get their first profitable year since 2010, now we had a question there, we want your rates to go down. Do you think, though, that the carriers, now that you're consolidating, the alliances seem to be exerting more influence, that maybe 2018 and going forward we can see some real profits for an industry that desperately needs them?
Well, it continues to be a challenge to try to control this rate-making effort and to bring profitability. Last year's profitability was not necessarily because of the Trans-Pacific trade. The profitability that came to the carriers last year was more dealt with the Asia to Europe trade. So this continues to be a struggling trade for carriers in general. Consolidation of carriers, the consolidation of consortiums into this group doesn't necessarily consolidate the supply. So I think it's going to continue to be a challenge for us to be able to bring our carrier group into profitability. The one thing that I said in my presentation is that the one area that we'll be pushing back and trying to improve our cost basis with is trying to move away from the ground transportation portion, which is adding cost to us. So in that sense, we may come into profitability, but raising the revenue line is going to be a continued challenge. Other than what Larry Gross was predicting, and as we come into the year 2020 and we start looking at the fuel requirements that are required of us and the fleet sizes that could change and the reduction in the concept to try to be the biggest capacity carrier out there, that's when I think that we're going to have a chance of realigning the supply-demand to a point of where we will make money.
Okay, thank you. And we have 15 seconds left, so I'll give our last question to Beth here. Let's say we do get 5% growth in container volume this year. Will the railroads be ready for that, given the fact that it was difficult this past winter? The Chicago was jam-packed, major congestion problems, chassis shortages, whatever. Will the railroads intermodally step up for peak season 2018, have the equipment, the power, the crew, everything needed for a smooth peak season?
Yeah, so I of course, am not a spokesman for the rail industry, so I couldn't begin to answer that for everybody. But what I can tell you is Union Pacific had a good peak season last year. I don't believe that we saw significant shortages in the West Coast ports in terms of providing the needed resources to our customers. We certainly expect to be in a situation where we're providing that same sort of service level in the 2018. One thing I would like to point out is 2017 was the first peak that we've seen in, I don't know, maybe 10 years, something like that, maybe even a little bit longer. So it'll be interesting to see if we have another peak this year or if we just see as kind of a sustained level of increased imports, kind of like we saw last year, although we did get a little bit of a peak. Clearly, it's easier for everybody if it's not a peak, right? It's much easier to be efficient if you have kind of an ongoing level amount of business that you want to handle. But our focus is on making sure that we're in good communication with our steamship partners and our BCOs so that we all understand capabilities and requirements and do our best to execute on those forecasts.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Thank you all. I guess, Noel, you want to come up and close it down. Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much, Bill, Panelists, thank you again so very much for making this year's Pulse of the Ports a great success. Before we dismiss, I just want to give a quick shout out to 3 upcoming events. One is actually about to begin, so I know it's sort of short notice, but the LA Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association is presenting a luncheon right now discussing current industry challenges. It's from 11:30 to 2 p.m. at the Holiday Inn on Vermont Avenue in Torrance. And then tomorrow evening, and on March 29th, Cal State Long Beach's Center for International Trade and Transportation is presenting its annual State of the Trade and Transportation Industry Town Hall, focusing on the newly revised Clean Air Action Plan. It's at the Gerald Daniel Recital Hall, beginning with a reception at 4:30 p.m. and the program from 6 to 8. And then on May 15th, the Foreign Trade Association will hold its 92nd annual World Trade Week and International Delegate Luncheon and Trade Fair at the Grand in Long Beach. Now, the three organizations that I just mentioned have tables at the back of the room. If you want to pick up some information about these or other events that they have scheduled in the coming weeks. Another reminder, self-parking is complimentary, so you don't need validation. And we encourage you to take our survey at www.polb.com/Pulse Survey. And again, thanks to all of you who contributed to making this 14th annual Pulse of the Ports peak season forecast a tremendous success. Thanks again to all of you for joining us, and we'll see you all again in 2019.